All right, welcome back to the deep dive. You know, I think we've all been there. You've got a test coming up, or you're just trying to learn something new, and you find yourself wondering, am I actually studying the right way? I mean, is just reading through the material over and over again really the best approach? Today, we're going to delve into that very question and specifically explore one technique that research keeps highlighting as surprisingly powerful: retrieval practice.
Now, you might be more familiar with this as testing yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Testing yourself. Think flashcards, practice quizzes, or even just trying to recall information from memory after reading a chapter.
Exactly. And it's so relevant today because we're bombarded with all these different learning resources, right? Online courses, mountains of supplemental materials, all claiming to have the magic formula for learning. It can be overwhelming.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we've gathered a bunch of research on retrieval practice. What we want to understand is, first of all, how and why students use it, or maybe don't use it as much as they should. And then we really want to get into what the science says about its impact, not just for rote memorization, but also for those trickier tasks like applying knowledge to solve problems. We want to figure out, can this technique actually help us become more effective learners?
And that's the intriguing part, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got this pile of evidence suggesting that actively recalling information is a fantastic way to learn. But so often, students don't seem to embrace it. So let's break it down. Let's start with the basics. What exactly do we mean by retrieval practice? And why is it so beneficial, at least in certain contexts?
Okay, so retrieval practice. At its core, it's pretty simple. It's the act of actively trying to pull information out of your memory. You're basically giving your brain a workout, consciously recalling what you've learned. You're not just passively skimming through your notes or watching a video again. And here's the thing. The research is super clear on this. When it comes to tasks that involve memorization, retrieval practice wins hands down. You remember things much better compared to just restudying the material.
And that applies across the board, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not limited to just one type of information. We're talking vocabulary, lists of facts, understanding concepts from text, even videos. It works for all of it.
And what's remarkable is that the benefits are actually pretty long-lasting. It's not just about cramming for that next exam. We're talking weeks, even months down the line. The advantage you gain from retrieval practice can still be there.
Right. It sticks with you. And it seems like the more you do it, the stronger the learning becomes. The more times you attempt to retrieve that information, the more you solidify it in your memory.
And of course, feedback is crucial. It's not just about blindly guessing.
Oh, absolutely.
When you test yourself and then find out what you got right and what you got wrong, that's where the real magic happens. You correct those errors. You refine your understanding. It's like having a built-in feedback loop for your learning process.
Right. It highlights those gaps. So it's not just about absorbing information. It's about actively engaging with it, figuring out what you've truly mastered and what needs more work. And this brings up a really important concept in the world of learning: metacognition.
Ah, yes, metacognition.
That ability to be aware of your own knowledge. Retrieval practice seems to enhance this, right?
It absolutely does.
Mhm.
Think of it as becoming a better judge of your own understanding. After using retrieval practice, you're much more accurate in predicting how well you'd actually perform on a real test. You're not just blindly confident or overly pessimistic. You have a more realistic grasp of what you know and what you don't.
Yeah, that self-awareness is so crucial. And here's the
Mm.
thing. It's not just in these controlled lab settings where we see these benefits.
Right.
Studies have shown that retrieval practice works in real educational environments. From young kids in preschool all the way up to college students, it's been shown to be effective across a range of subjects. It seems like a pretty solid finding when it comes to improving memory.
But as you mentioned earlier, things get a bit more complicated when we step beyond just memorizing facts.
Mhm.
What happens when we look at those tasks that require us to apply knowledge in different ways, to make inferences, to solve problems? What does our research tell us about how retrieval practice works in those situations?
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. So when we start talking about complex tasks, the benefits of retrieval aren't always as straightforward. It's not always that simple boost to performance. A great example of this is a study done back in 2015 by Tran and colleagues.
Oh, I remember this one.
Yeah, they were looking at deductive reasoning. And what they found was that, initially, just trying to recall the premises of an argument didn't give students an advantage over simply rereading those premises when it came to actually making logical deductions.
So just having the information fresh in your mind wasn't enough to boost their reasoning skills. It's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it?
It is. You'd think, right, that if you have that foundation readily available, it would automatically help you reason better. But it seems there's more to it than that. And some follow-up studies actually shed some really important light on this.
Like the studies by Wisman and his colleagues, and Eglinton and Kang.
Yeah, those are great examples. So what they found was that retrieval can be helpful for deductive reasoning, but there are some key factors at play. For instance, Wisman's team found that if you give participants extra practice specifically on recalling those premises with feedback, that leads to better initial memory, and then retrieval does lead to better performance on both memory and reasoning tests.
So it's not just about the act of recalling, it's about what you're actually recalling, and whether that strengthens your grasp of the foundational information.
Exactly. And Eglinton and Kang's research actually showed that if the premises were presented in a way that made the connections between them clearer, then retrieval also helped with later deductive reasoning.
It's as if the way you initially learn the material can impact how effective retrieval practice is for those complex reasoning tasks.
Right. And this idea that the initial learning phase matters, it extends to another type of problem solving as well, analogical problem solving.
Oh yeah, that's using the solution from one problem to help you solve a new similar problem.
Yeah.
Classic problem-solving strategy.
Exactly. But there have been studies by Peterson and Wisman and also by Hofstadter and colleagues that have shown simply retrieving that original problem and solution doesn't automatically make you better at solving a new analogous problem.
That's really interesting. You'd think that remembering a similar solution would give you a head start.
You would. But it seems like the key is whether you actually remember the critical information from the original problem, the stuff that's relevant to solving this new one.
Ah, so it's not just about having a vague memory of a similar problem. It's about remembering the specific details that are crucial for making that connection.
Precisely. And Hofstadter's study showed that when participants were given specific practice recalling those crucial details, they were much better at solving the new problem later.
So again, the content of what you're retrieving matters.
Yeah. And another interesting finding from both Peterson and Wisman's study and Hofstadter's study was that often a hint was needed.
A hint.
Yeah, a hint that explicitly linked the old solution to the new problem. And when they gave that hint, retrieval became much more effective.
So it seems like for these more complex tasks, maybe just focusing on memory alone isn't enough.
Right. It seems like building that solid understanding first, looking at multiple examples, really grasping the underlying principles might be more crucial in the early stages.
It's like you need to lay that groundwork first.
Absolutely. And this actually brings us to a really fascinating concept, the worked example effect. Have you heard of this?
Oh, yeah. This is where you learn by studying a fully worked out solution to a problem rather than just diving in and trying to solve it on your own.
Right. And, there's a ton of research on this. And what's really interesting is that for learners who are new to a topic, especially in fields like, say, electrical circuits or probability, studying these worked examples can actually be more effective, at least initially, than trying to solve the problems independently.
So we have studies by Van Gogh, Bars, Yeo and Fazio all pointing to this.
Yeah, it's pretty well established, and it almost feels counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does. You'd think that struggling with a problem would be the best way to learn.
You'd think so, right? Like that active engagement would really cement the learning. But it seems like for beginners, jumping straight into problem solving can actually be a bit too much.
Yeah, it can overload their cognitive resources, right?
Right, exactly. And this is where cognitive load theory comes in.
Okay, let's talk about that.
So cognitive load theory basically says that our working memory, where we process information, has limited capacity.
It's a finite resource.
And learning happens best when we can really focus those mental resources on the essential information, the stuff that's directly relevant to understanding the concept. That's called germane load.
And then there's extraneous load, which is all the stuff that's not directly contributing to learning, the things that might actually get in the way.
Exactly. And worked examples, particularly for those who are new to a topic, seem to help reduce that extraneous load. They're basically showing you the correct steps and the reasoning behind them so you don't have to figure it out from scratch. And that frees up your mental resources to really focus on understanding the underlying principles to start building that mental framework.
It's like they provide a scaffolding, right?
Yes, a scaffolding for learning. And as you gain more knowledge and experience, that scaffolding becomes less necessary.
Right, and that's where we see the expertise reversal effect, where what was helpful for a beginner might actually become redundant, even less effective, for someone who's already developed a good understanding of the topic.
So the key takeaway here is that the best strategy really depends on your current level of understanding.
It's about adapting your approach as you progress.
Now, our sources also talk about how, when it comes to complex tasks, both understanding the rules and remembering them are crucial.
Yeah, it's not one or the other, it's both.
And Kalyuga Singh actually made this point that for complex learning, you need to both induce the rules, meaning figure out how they work, and be able to remember them for future use.
So depending on your goal, whether it's initial understanding or later recall, different learning approaches might be more effective.
Exactly. And a 2019 study by Yeo and Fazio actually illustrated this beautifully when they were looking at learning probability problems.
What do they find?
So they compared using identical versus non-identical practice problems.
Meaning the same problems with just different numbers versus different problems that tested the same underlying concept.
Right. And they found a really interesting difference. So when learners practiced with those non-identical problems, where the procedure was the same but the specific scenarios were different, studying worked examples actually led to better performance later. But when they practiced with identical problems, just different numbers, solving the problems themselves, which involves retrieving that procedure from memory, was actually more effective for remembering how to do it.
Fascinating. So retrieval seems particularly helpful for cementing those specific procedures in your mind, especially when you're practicing applying them repeatedly.
Right. But for grasping those general principles that apply across different situations, studying those worked examples might be more beneficial initially.
So it's not just about retrieval versus no retrieval. It's about matching the strategy to your learning goals.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about what retrieval practice is, its benefits, how it works in those more complex learning situations. But now the big question is, how do students actually use retrieval in their own studying? Do their habits align with what we know from the research?
Well, this is where things get a little tricky. When it comes to those memory-based tasks, the ones we know benefit so much from retrieval practice, studies consistently show that students often prefer to just reread their notes or their textbooks rather than actively testing themselves.
We've got research by Karpik, Dunlosky, and Rawson all pointing to this.
It's a pretty common finding. And it's surprising, isn't it, considering how effective testing can be for memory?
It is. So why do you think students tend to gravitate towards that restudying approach?
Well, it seems like several factors are at play. One is the perceived difficulty of the material.
Okay, so how hard they think it is.
Right. Tellis and colleagues, along with Tupino and others, have found that students are more likely to test themselves on material they perceive as easier. But when they hit those tougher concepts, they tend to switch to restudying.
Almost like they're avoiding confronting those areas where they might be struggling.
Yeah, it's like they're testing what they already feel good about. And then there's this really interesting study from 2019 by Kirk Johnson and colleagues.
What did they find?
They found that students actually perceive retrieval as more effortful and, crucially, less effective for learning compared to restudying. And this belief directly influenced their choice to choose restudying over testing.
So it's not just about laziness, right?
No, not at all. It's about a genuine belief that they're learning better by simply reviewing the material.
Which, ironically, isn't necessarily true.
Exactly. It's a misconception about how learning works.
And we have surveys by Geller, Hartwig and Dunlosky, and Cornell and Bjork that actually support this. They show that when students do engage in self-testing, it's often to check their current knowledge, to see what they've already learned.
Yeah, like a self-assessment.
Right, rather than seeing it as the best way to learn the material in the first place.
So they're using testing as an assessment tool, not as a learning tool.
Exactly. And this seems to be reflected in how students approach those optional practice quizzes in their courses.
Right.
We have studies by Carrillo de la Peña and others that have looked at this, and they show that even when these quizzes are offered, completion rates aren't as high as you might expect.
You'd think if students truly appreciated the learning benefits, they'd jump at the chance for extra practice.
Yeah.
And Johnson's work, which followed students' quiz usage over an entire term, found that even though many students used at least one quiz, that overall completion rate was still pretty low.
And even when students do utilize those online review materials, like we saw in the studies by Carpenter et al. And Corral et al., the timing of their use is really telling.
Right. It often suggests they're using them primarily for that last-minute cramming to check their understanding right before an exam.
Yeah, again, it's that assessment focus rather than seeing it as an ongoing learning strategy. So it seems like for memory-based tasks, the pattern's pretty clear. Students underutilize retrieval practice, prefer those passive methods like restudying, and see testing more as a gauge of their current knowledge level.
It's an interesting contrast, isn't it, when we look at how students approach problem-solving tasks?
Oh, absolutely. So when we shift to that problem-solving context, things get a bit flipped.
In what way?
So we have a study from 2018 by Foster and colleagues. They found that when students were given a choice between studying worked examples and trying to solve problems themselves, they often chose to tackle those problems head on, even though, get this, the worked examples were actually more effective for learning those underlying principles.
That's the opposite of what we saw with memory tasks.
It is. So why this preference for diving straight into the problems, even when the evidence suggests those worked examples might be a better way to learn, at least for those who are still getting a grasp of the material?
That's a great question.
It seems like in this context, students might be using that attempt to solve the problem as a way to check their understanding, similar to how they use retrieval in those memory tasks.
Interesting.
Yeah, Foster's study actually found that students often opted to look at those worked examples after they'd struggled with the problem, suggesting they were using them to figure out where they went wrong.
So they're using the problem itself as the initial assessment.
Yeah, exactly. And studies in actual classroom settings, like the ones by Tempelar et al. In math and Liu in computer science, have also shown this strong preference among students for attempting those practice problems. Now, this could be influenced by things like grading policies or the course format, but that underlying motivation might still be there, that desire to jump in, see if they can apply what they've learned.
It's that active engagement again.
Yeah. So to bring it all together, it seems like across both memory-based and problem-solving tasks, students often use retrieval, whether it's self-testing or trying those practice problems, more as a way to assess where they're at than as that primary strategy for building knowledge.
It's about checking their understanding rather than seeing retrieval itself as the key to learning.
And this brings us back to the role of effort, which we touched on earlier.
Right.
So we know students often find retrieval practice more mentally demanding than just restudying. But they don't always recognize that that effort is actually leading to better long-term learning.
Especially for those memory tasks.
Yeah. It's as if that feeling of effort is giving them the wrong signal.
Almost a misleading cue.
Right. They experience that struggle of trying to recall something, and they might misinterpret it as a sign that they didn't learn the material well enough to begin with. And then, what do? They go back to what feels easier, rereading those notes, reviewing those worked examples.
It's like they see the initial study phase as the true learning phase.
Yeah. And retrieval is just that checkup to see if it stuck.
And this actually aligns with a framework called the discrepancy reduction framework.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So this framework suggests that retrieval basically reveals the gap between what you currently know and what you're aiming to know. And the natural response for many people is to go back to studying to try to close that gap.
So instead of seeing the effort of retrieval as the mechanism for bridging that gap, they see it as a sign that they need to go back and study more.
Exactly. It's a misinterpretation of the role of effort in learning.
And this raises a really crucial question, doesn't it? Does that perception of effort lead students to just avoid retrieval altogether? Or does it push them towards those more passive study methods because they think that's the real path to learning?
It's a question worth pondering, and it has big implications for how we approach teaching and learning.
Absolutely. So if we know students aren't utilizing retrieval as much as they could, what can we do about it? How can we encourage more optimal use of this technique?
Well, one approach is to just be upfront with students about the benefits.
Like, just tell them.
Yeah, just tell them. We have research by Tolis and colleagues, Ariel and Karpike, Dunlosky and Rawson, all showing that when you explicitly tell students how effective retrieval practice can be, they're more likely to use it.
And we've seen this in action in classrooms.
We have. Kibble, for example, found that explaining the value of those optional online quizzes in a physiology course led to way more students participating.
And Carpenter et al., in their biology course, found that highlighting the benefits of those practice questions and sharing data on the link between quiz use and exam performance also encouraged more engagement.
So transparency can go a long way.
It can, but as you know, just being aware of the benefits might not always be enough.
Right, old habits die hard.
Yeah, and those perceived costs of retrieval, that mental effort, might still feel too high compared to those easier study methods.
So what else can we do?
Well, there's some other interesting strategies out there. I'm thinking of the research by Vaughan and Cornell on providing hints during retrieval.
Ah, that's a good one.
Yeah. So they found that students were way more willing to test themselves when they knew they could get a little bit of help if they needed it.
It lowers the stakes a bit.
It does. And what's really interesting is that it didn't seem to reduce the learning benefits.
So those hints can make retrieval more approachable without sacrificing effectiveness.
Exactly. And then there's this technique called the method of successive relearning.
Oh, yes. Rawson and Dunlosky have done a lot of work on this.
Yeah. It basically provides students with a very clear step-by-step approach for doing repeated retrieval practice with feedback. It's that kind of structured guidance that can be really helpful for students who might not know where to start.
It takes the guesswork out of it.
It does. And when we think about those complex learning tasks, it's likely that the best use of retrieval will be more nuanced, right?
It'll depend on individual learners, their goals, the specific task.
Right. And there's this concept called partial problem solving that might be really helpful here.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So it's basically where students complete some steps of the solution, but then they're given guidance for the others.
It's like a blend of practice and worked examples.
Exactly. And research suggests that this can be both effective for learning and also potentially more appealing to students.
It strikes that balance between challenge and support.
All right, so let's wrap this all up. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
So retrieval practice, it's clearly a powerful technique for strengthening memory. Although its role in those more complex learning scenarios is a bit more intricate and depends on a lot of factors.
Right, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
And the key takeaway is that students often don't utilize it as much as they could, and this seems to stem from how they perceive the effort involved and what they think the role of testing is in learning.
They often see it as a way to assess what they know rather than as the primary way to build that knowledge.
Right, and understanding that is crucial for becoming more effective learners.
It's about making those informed decisions about your study strategies.
Absolutely. So as you think about your next study session, ask yourself, am I just going for the easy, comfortable approach? Or am I willing to embrace that challenge, that desirable difficulty of retrieval practice to really solidify that learning? What's one small tweak you could make to your routine based on what we've talked about today? We'd love to hear your thoughts, your strategies, any questions you might have. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.